Welcome to the Burnout Room, a podcast about burnout, effective leadership, and well-being in nonprofits.
I'm Dr. Courtney Keim, a workplace wellness researcher and professor.
And I'm Sarah Burris, an organizational leader and nonprofit wellness advocate.
Whether you are facing burnout, leading a team, or working to build a healthier workplace, this is your space to find support, community, and solutions for any organization. Okay, well, Sarah, I'm really excited today to welcome Eric Hawkins to our podcast. Eric has decades of experience in management and in transportation and logistics, and he's also worked with and consulted with nonprofits such as YMCA Safe Place Services. I know Eric because of his service through the Juvenile Justice Advisory Board, which my class has collaborated with the JJAB for a number of years, and also his work on Bellarmine's University Alumni Board. So welcome, Eric. We're really excited to have you today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you and Sarah. So thank you, Courtney, for the warm welcome.
Oh, you're so welcome. So we sent you a few questions in the lead up to prepare for today's podcast episode. And one of the things we asked was about how you define burnout. What does burnout mean to you? And so you had put in your response that burnout is the sum of all things, which felt very kind of heavy. And I wondered if that was on purpose. But can you say more about what you meant by that, with burnout being the sum of all of the things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we often pay more attention to credit scores, right? And here recently, we've got a number of apps and devices that are now providing us with a health score, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we often fail to understand is all of the things that we're doing in our daily lives, whether or not it is associated with work or our education, or it is pertaining to our family lives, we can have some positive attributes or positive contributions or inputs, and then we can also have some negative contributions or negative inputs. And I think that when you have an imbalance, or you have one that is, heavily skewed towards the negative, it can really pull down that score. And I think that score is what leads to burnout. Mm-hmm. Another way to think about that, I don't know if anyone has a marketing background here, but in my years in the marketing realm, we understood how to measure customer experience through what is known as the Net Promoter Score. And the Net Promoter Score was really the difference between positive scores when asked the question, would you recommend this organization or service to a friend, colleague, or otherwise? And the 9s and the 10s were what was referred to as a promoter score. And then everything from a 7 down was considered a detractor. So you would take the difference between the total amount of scores and what was promoters, and the difference between the total amount of scores and what were detractors, and that would yield a Net Promoter Score. So you knew whether or not you were in a world-class organization when it came to customer experience, or if you had some things that you needed to work on. And I think that that's something that we can often look at when we're thinking about whether or not we're leading towards a path towards burnout, or if we are actually doing some things to help push away or keep the burnout at bay and keep us in a more healthy, both physical, mental mindset to be able to take on the challenges as they come forward.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate the marketing example. Don't have a background in marketing, so that does sound very interesting. But I like that idea of burnout. In order to figure out if somebody is burned out, you have to consider all of the things, right? I think you even mentioned the word balance. Like, do you have a good balance between maybe home life and work life, like different balance in different parts of your job? But that burnout, you have to consider all parts of an employee's kind of satisfaction, if you will. If we're thinking about customer satisfaction, like employee satisfaction with their workplace, it's burnout really is encompassing all parts of how a person might think about how happy they are in their job, or how they're, is that a safe way to kind of summarize what you were saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that is sort of lost on the nonprofit world is, as we're, I'm a B school graduate, right? And as you're going through B school and that central question of whether or not you are maximizing shareholder wealth also gives you a whole host of tools in order to work with, right? And those tools include everything from finance operations and capital investments, all the way down to employee engagement, right? And the employee experience. I mentioned customer experience earlier. Well, customer experience is not lost on just external customers. It's also about the internal customers as well, because that's how you maximize profit in a for-profit institution or entity, right? So in the nonprofit world, we haven't delved into these questions about the employee's experience or not, right? We're pretty much executing on the grant requirements, right? And oftentimes those grant requirements don't include anything about how well you're taking care of your people, right? So I think that it's really important for us to make sure that we're considering in a nonprofit realm how we're taking care of our people, not just externally, but also internally as well.
I think that's a really great point. And so when you're talking about tools, I'm thinking about the different tools that nonprofits do use in order to get information about their mission out or to communicate with funders. And one of the tools that nonprofits love to use are stories. Like, we're storytellers. We want people to know why it is we're doing the things that we're doing. So I'm wondering, Eric, if you would be willing to tell us a story for about a time where you were working in either a nonprofit or a for-profit corporation, where you experienced burnout, or where you saw someone else experiencing burnout.
Yeah, sure. Oftentimes in the nonprofit world, especially, it's all about how to do more with less. And this mindset can really take hold in areas where we're not just talking about monetary means, but also where we're talking about really mental, physical capacities, as well as empathy, right? And oftentimes the consideration about the employee's experience sort of takes a back burner to the focus that is on the external customer or the direct services and our clients who are, around the community, around that sort of metropolitan area, if you will. Depending on your focus, you could be local, you could be regional, you could be national with that lens. And oftentimes you have issues right there in front of you that are often more alarming, but because of where they fit categorically, you're not really focused on it, right? You're more focused on the things that make a great story for the external, either philanthropic community, sourcing, to suppliers, or then also to those grantors, the ones who are providing the dollars and reading the grant proposals and understanding what it is that you do in your direct service. And I often think that there is a way in which nonprofits could enter the commercial realm and provide services as a commercial product or service that will help enhance or build more capacity for them to continue doing their mission critical work. And what they have to make sure that they're doing is telling the stories of the employees internally who are doing the work and how the nonprofit has provided for them and their families, and coupling that with stories for the external clients and how that direct services also build a bridge for them as well. And it takes a marketing sort of mindset to do that, and one in which you're not just purely engaging for the sake of empathy, but one where you can see how you can continue to build resources and make more resources available for the direct services that you wish to continue. If that at all makes sense.
Yeah.
It's
No, no, I think you raise a really interesting point, and kind of the wheels are turning as you're talking about it. You mentioned that, like, I think in the for-profit world, stakeholders and CEOs they are somehow aware of the fact of employee engagement being linked to productivity. Therefore, let's focus on employee engagement so that we are more productive. But in the nonprofit sector, I think what I'm hearing you saying is, like, donors don't ask about employee engagement. Folks that are giving grants are not asking about. I don't think I've ever seen on a grant application anything about what is the employee engagement level of the staff at your nonprofit. It's like those folks may not have gotten the message that this actually is something that's critically important to mission and services, is taking care of the health and well-being of the staff. But those folks are not asking for that information. They're not requiring that information to be able to give finances. I'm wondering though, like, can you think of a time? Have you seen someone who's been working in a nonprofit who has not been well and experiencing burnout, and the grant, like, does this ring true? Can you think of an example of that happening where the folks giving the grant don't really ask about it? They don't care. Maybe even the executive director of the nonprofit is not thinking about this, but the person who's in that staff role may be feeling it anyway, right?
So your question is so specific. It's almost like you and I have talked about this before.
Which
And
we
I'm
have not.
like, we haven't talked about this before.
We haven't talked about this.
But I do have several stories where, executive directors, director level managers tend to take their own anxiety, right? And this is something that is really common, across conversations. This is really common, where you take your own anxiety and you don't know any better because you haven't had the tools available to you to really flesh out or really make sense of what you're experiencing. But you take your own anxiety, and the first thing that you do, sort of instinctively and as a default mode, is you want to shrink everybody around you. You shrink everybody around you, shrink their voices, you shrink their concerns, and you simply push forward with whatever your agenda items are. And as a result of that, you produce less. You get less gains from your own endeavors or from your own agenda because of the fact that your team has been minimized or belittled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of those things that the corporate executive in the for-profit world is going to pay attention to is turnover and attrition and the cost of hiring, right? The cost of onboarding, right? All of those things will pull from your net profit, from your bottom line. And in the nonprofit world, these are the things that are sort of furthest from someone's mind, right? Because for most nonprofits, they're really engaged in doing a lot of great work and they're helping communities. And they tend to have an endless pipeline of candidates willing to come into their organization and help contribute to these missions, right? But what they don't understand is that as in any entity or institution, you're going to have your knowledge-bearing individuals who really know the operations forwards and backwards from the beginning to the end. And when those folks start to leave, the entire operation takes a step back, right? In its ability to create positive outcomes for clients and the community, as well as, created an opportunity for people to not be able to follow through on their grant requirements, right? And if you can't follow through on the grant requirements, is this a multi-year or quarter or period deal where now the entire award is in jeopardy because you couldn't satisfy this initial 6 months requirement. So, oftentimes these things can really lead to more pain in the community because the nonprofit wasn't able to sustain its service to members. So I think that I have stories, and the stories are so specific that I don't know about my ability to keep it anonymous at this point.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will I will say this, that you have really legacy institutions, right? Legacy institutions that have the same level of burnout as startup nonprofits, right? And it is because of this phrase in the English language that often you will hear people say that it is one of the worst phrases in the English language. And that is, we're doing it how we've always done it,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
And generationally, that doesn't work, right?
Right.
Because with each new generation that comes in, there's a whole host of circumstances, right? You have your socioeconomic factors, your economic factors, you have, um, you know, world sort of worldview issues. You got your national, local issues, but then you have new technologies that come into play that really create an opportunity for more understanding about how we got to where we are and where we came from and the way forward. And then, I mean, as young people start to understand these things and move forward with it, they're not going to be as accepting of responses like, "Well, that's the way we've always done it," right? So I think that it needs to be something where leaders, so your executive directors, your director level managers are understanding their own sort of mental health issues, are continually looking to improve or get better and get on a path towards healing from their own issues. And they're not trying to extend their own pain and suffering into those who report to them. I think that it's often something that we as parents um, inadvertently create for our children. We tend to minimize the pain of our children, and that extends right into organizations where leaders are doing the same thing with their employee bases as well.
Yeah.
Um, I will say this as well. When you have someone who was a recipient of direct services in an organization, and then they're given a role within that organization to become part of the leadership team, oftentimes they see things through their lens as a recipient, and then they're trying to lead from that same lens, and it doesn't work. What they did not understand was that you have these environmental factors, and oftentimes we're leaning in this society, we're leaning towards restorative justice, and we're really still trying to understand what transformative justice looks like. And your ability to remove negative inputs, right? Remove those really causal points in a person's pain and suffering. And this attitude of, I did it, you can do it too, is not going
Mhm.
to work, right? But oftentimes that's what we're seeing in our nonprofit spaces is it worked for me, it'll work for you too. But yeah, you haven't looked further enough, far enough back in this person's background to see that no, they had some other things going on here that makes them a little bit more susceptible or a little bit more vulnerable and not as strong as you were when you came here, even though you had, your own vulnerabilities as well.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Oh my gosh.
I,
I wrote down so many things while you were talking. I want to try to hit on all of them, and Sarah probably did too. I do want to say, as I get further along into this role of a parent, and also as I in throughout my career, I would say I'm mid-career now and getting more into leadership roles, like the Venn diagram overlap between parenting and
Mhm.
leadership, I don't know that it's a full circle, but oh my goodness, I am seeing it so much. There is so much overlap between, and when you were talking about how leaders who want to say this is the way that we've always done it, I wonder if those are the same parents that keep parenting like they were parented because that's how they were parented and they turned out fine, kind of thing, instead of stopping and saying like, oh, maybe there is a better way. Maybe it wasn't anything bad necessarily about the way that I came up, but if I could do it in a better way. So maybe it did work for your nonprofit for a while, and this is the way that things have been done and it has been effective. But considering new ways of doing things, that it could even be better. And you talked about how I so appreciate, because I'm around young people all the time in my job as a university professor. I appreciate that this generation of young folks are not taking that as an answer. They're not saying, yeah, this is the way that we've always done it. We've always been overworked and underpaid. We've always been, had to do whatever the boss says and not have any control or autonomy in our job. And so that's we're just going to keep doing it that way because it's always been done that way. It's like maybe, leaders could think about changing their leadership style as you might consider changing your parenting style, and change the way that you're approaching these situations to consider these new ideas, new decision-making, new technologies, new environment, new financial constraints. Like things are different. This is a different nonprofit world than it was even 20 years ago. And that may require changes in leadership strategy.
Yeah. And some of us are out here still doing the same procedures that we were doing 20 years ago, because as I've mentioned before, nonprofits don't love to change. And I know Courtney mentioned, none of us like to change, but nonprofits, like, we really just don't like to change. And I think that that's a really great point, that we need leaders to change their mindset about change. And I think that the more people allow themselves to hear new voices who are coming in. I have a great example of this. For a really long time in my organization, we would put on continuing education events and we would collect evaluative data after those events. And I would just hand type all of that information into an Excel document and tally it all up and send it to the presenter. We hired a new gal in who took a look at that process and literally said, I'm not doing that. And so she created an electronic evaluation system that would automatically populate all the data that we needed. And I resisted the whole time. I'm like, but what if the technology breaks? What if? Well, guess what? We implemented her process and it completely revolutionized the way that we did that work. So allowing yourself as a leader to kind of set your ego aside a little bit, to set your anxieties aside a little bit, and recognize that new voices that are coming in are there to help you grow your organization, not to dismantle everything that you've built over 20 years.
Yeah. And
well
another
said.
thing,
Well said.
yeah, same. I agree. Yeah, well said. The other thing that I did want to mention that you brought up too, Eric, a little bit ago was considerations about turnover. I do think that a lot of nonprofit leaders recognize that turnover is bad. It's hurting them. I think we have some evidence, some surveys and stuff that say we know burnout's bad, we know turnover is bad. But you raised a really interesting point, which is trying to address the turnover when you have a kind of a stream of people who are constantly applying. You may not really, I don't know that nonprofit leaders don't care about the turnover as much as it is that they don't know how to fix it. They don't have the resources to evaluate it. They don't have the money to hire consultants to come in and evaluate the cause of turnover. They don't have a big HR department. They very unlikely have an IO psychologist that's going to be working for them that can do that kind of data analytic approach. And so even if they don't want turnover to be bad and they know that they are losing some intellectual property by having long-term people leave, it's almost like they don't have the luxury to stop and try to fix it, because mission creep, because it's, these clients need our services. Like, that is the thing that's most important, is I've got people who are knocking on my door that need the services that we provide. I don't have time. And I've got 25 people that want to apply for your job. So if you leave, I'll just bring in another person. So we know that, like, that turnover is bad, that losing those people is bad, that it's costly to the organization. But I feel like sometimes nonprofit leaders they don't have the luxury of the time to be able to focus on reducing that turnover. And and don't think about it in the same way as like our for-profit leaders get to think about turnover.
Yes, very well said as well. And I have two examples. One is I was working for a large Fortune 500 entity that wanted to get into a new product or service that had never been developed before. They were seeking regulatory approval in order to commercialize and bring it to the market. And what they did was they brought in a consultant. So you just mentioned consultants, and the leader of the organization really felt strongly about this and removed all the budget controls to make sure that they spared no expense with getting this product or service off the ground. And they brought in a consultant to show them how. The consultant said to them, well, if you're going to do something that you've never done before, you're going to have to be willing to do things you haven't done before. And if you want to be successful in this environment or in this culture that you have, and it was a 115-year-old company, right? So they said, I would recommend that you take this operation, this particular startup unit, and move it off-site. So off-site they went. They were 20 miles outside the city in a place that they called the farm. And that's where they started doing all of the beta testing and writing the regulatory documents required to receive approvals for really proof of concept at this point. And one of the things that the consultant said was, don't just move off site for the sake of moving off site. You're going to have to leave behind some of your legacy policies. So when I joined this particular unit, I had the opportunity for the first time in my career to grow a beard, right? Because previously to this, there was this old policy that came from, the 20s and the 30s. I'm literally talking about 1920s and the 1930s, where everybody had to be clean shaved. And you get out here to the farm, and all of these rules that we had been abiding by when we were working for the larger parent company were now all relaxed. And what it was really trying to change the mindset of our endeavor, which is to say that we're not just trying to pull up, grandpa's mission statement. What we're trying to do is recreate something for the future, for something that doesn't exist in today's world. So I think that small things, right, can make a huge difference in shifting that culture or that mindset and allowing leaders to understand what is happening with employees and to have employees feel seen and heard, right? And there's a lot of leaders that don't even understand what it means to feel seen or heard. They're like, what are you talking about? I talk to you every day. Every day right. you get, my leadership. It's like, no, that's not what is meant by feeling seen and heard. It's not just listening to a person's words, but also seeing their actions, right? By seeing that they show up 30 minutes early every day, or that they're staying 30 minutes late every day. It tells you that you have something that you may need to address, right? Because if an employee is staying 30 minutes too late every day, well, why is that? What kind of resources can we put in place so that this person can get out of here on time and they can spend more time at home with their families, spend more time at home or spending time with friends, right? Or maybe they're needing to get to the gym or getting to that massage therapist or whatever it may be. You're allowing that person to have more time to themselves instead of spending all their time in the office. And there's not a lot of leaders that are willing to do that right now. They're just happy that somebody's willing to stay late and get things done rather than saying, well, this person deserves more, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that is such a great point that ensuring that leaders treat people like whole people, like we're not just automatons that are coming to work, we are whole people, and making sure that our leaders recognize that and treat that with respect because you're right. If somebody's staying 30 minutes late and that is a consistent thing, it's not like we have a big event or something going on. It's just a regular Tuesday and they're staying late. Something is wrong with the way that their job is set up to where they can't leave on time. It's not like the olden days where it's like, look at this go-getter. It's like, no, we're not doing something right in the workplace to ensure that that person can do the work that we've given them in the amount of time that we are paying them to work.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you said you had two examples. So one was the going to work at the farm, and I think the getting to grow a beard, which is more which is wonderful, but also representative of just being able to have these loosened restrictions and be able to have a little bit more autonomy and control over how you present yourself at work. But what was your other example that you were going to say?
So the next example was I was hired into a nonprofit, and this is also a 100-year-old organization that had some explosive growth in the last 15, 20 years. And they wanted to take some of the in-house services that they had been providing for some of their buildings, and they wanted to take that into the commercial market. And we're referring to sort of janitorial and cleaning services, right? And they said, well, let's take this to the commercial market. Well, they had been really focused on some of these really ancient stories we've heard around, our society. And those are the stories of such figures as Colonel Sanders, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard the story of Colonel Sanders or not, but apparently, he knocked on doors of restaurants trying to sell his chicken recipe. And he was at around 100, I'm sorry, not 100, he was around 1,000 knocks before he got his first yes, right? And so they brought me in and they said, well, we just need you to knock on doors, right? And I said, well, if you're referring to Colonel Sanders, what you have to understand is that Colonel Sanders was knocking on doors with a warm piece of chicken in his hand.
Right. He had something to offer.
Exactly.
I was like, I'm selling janitorial services, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to knock on somebody's door with a mop in my hand and maybe some clean water and run in and mop their floor up real fast to show them what we can do, So it goes back to the storytelling, right? I said, you created this brochure that you didn't hand me or get my input on. You didn't allow me to sign off on this brochure before you printed up, 5,000 brochures. But what would have been great in this brochure is if you told a story of one of our janitors, and likely one of the janitors who's been with us the longest. And if you told his story, and his story was amazing, right? And he actually helped open my eyes. This man is reporting to me, and he's sharing things with me that's giving me more of a lens on the situation. And he told me that when he's sweeping the sidewalk, or he's picking trash up out of the curb, he connects his role as a janitor to the mission of the corporate organization, right? He says that when people come here for services, I want that person to feel whole, right? I don't want this person to feel like this was the last stop on their journey, but in fact that this was a conscious choice and one that's going to yield positive outcomes. And we do that by keeping the place clean, right? And I said, if you'd have told that story in this brochure and I could go to that prospective client or that prospective customer and show them this brochure, now they understand who I'm bringing on the team in order to ensure that we're going to keep our promise. We're going to make sure that the contract that we sign with you is always 100% in compliance and that we don't have any breaches with the services that we're providing, because these are the folks that we're bringing in and they feel passionately about the services that they're going to provide for you and your organization. So, it's so difficult really to get through the layers of anxiety that our leaders are experiencing. and the fact that each and every day, I don't know if it is job insecurity that they're most focused on. Is it budget overruns that they're more concerned about? Is it something that's going on in their home life or with their families that they're concerned about? But oftentimes we have people in roles that don't have the resources that they need, or they're not focused or allowing those resources to really make a difference in the way that they lead. So
Yeah.
it's a couple of things.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, so you've mentioned this a couple of times, this idea of anxiety being something that really drives a lot of leadership decisions.
Mhm.
And so I think about anxiety. I think about anxiety a lot as someone who has a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I think about, of course, also is Inside Out 2 when I think about anxiety. When anxiety comes in Inside Out 2 and she brings all of her baggage, she's got all the
Mhm.
luggage because she's bringing all that baggage with her when she comes. And when you think about fear and anxiety being two sides of the same coin, we as humans, we need anxiety, we need fear to keep us safe. These are emotions that help us to be wary of things that might cause us harm, and maybe make us not take risks because we don't want to take these risks because we could hurt ourselves if we take risks.
Mhm.
But anxiety is also, as my therapist has told me, a liar. Anxiety lies to you. Anxiety never tells you the truth. She's never been right. My anxiety. I have named her. I will not tell you what her name is, but she's never right. She lies to me. And anxiety is trying to protect us, but it can protect us in such a way that can lead us astray. And so I'm thinking like, wow, you're making me think a little bit more about if I'm an organizational leader, there are things I might be afraid of. I might be afraid of payroll concerns. I might be afraid of budgetary concerns, especially in the nonprofit sector right now. I might be afraid that I might lose my job. I might be afraid that people won't listen to me if I tell them what to do. So there's probably all of these fears. And the question becomes maybe how many of those fears are rational and how many of those fears are irrational that are not actually serving the organization well. So you're kind of bringing these, you're overreacting to some of these irrational fears that you might have as a leader instead of saying, that's my thought process. That's what I'm thinking, but maybe that's not the reality of what's really happening or what will happen. It's such an interesting framing that I've never thought about before. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. You're gotten me thinking about that in a different way.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and thank you for sharing your own story. I have my own story as well: depression, ADHD. I'll tell the story from the third person view. How about that? Leader thought that the folks that were reporting to the leader were laughing at the leader. And this is a laughing at the leader instead of laughing with the leader. So the leader packed up all of their personal belongings and they left in the middle of the operation, went home in the middle of the operation. And this was sort of um, the apex of what had been happening in the organization for about the last 10 months. You know, there were several situations that were clear indications that something was going on personally. And there was actually some disciplinary action that took place with an employee because the employee was only seeking some advocacy from their leader, right? It's a situation where, we're on the foothills of COVID-19 and working from home. And here we're going to do this construction project. We're going to put an entire room of people into a smaller room and have them perform their very tedious data processing roles in a very confined, tight room where there's going to be a lot of distraction, a lot of things that pull focus, a lot of things that will not allow people to do um, to meet the standard of quality work that they are promising to provide. And when the question came up to the leader about, hey, can we work from home? The leader didn't see it as an opportunity to learn more about the request. The leader instead decided to attack the individual on why the person was wearing headphones.
Mm.
And the person explained, well, I wear headphones because the headphones help me focus on the work. And the leader said, well, what are you listening to in the headphone? And the person responded, the employee responded, well, it doesn't matter what I'm listening to in the headphones. It allows me to actually focus more on the work. And the leader responded, well, you're probably listening to music. And so the employee finally said, hey, look, I don't need you to necessarily understand why I'm listening to anything in my headphones. What you should be asking yourself or asking me is, why are you asking to work from home so that I can, or so that you may then go back to the leadership team and say, hey, I have an employee here who has a request who would like to work from home during this construction period. Is that going to be okay? And because the employee provided such an uncomfortable situation for the leader ended up writing the person up and putting it in the file as if it was a warning, a disciplinary action, because the employee was asking for advocacy, right? And so that's one of the examples that I have to share, because I think that this is what leads to burnout, is when an employee can't even receive advocacy from their direct leader in the workplace, where that leader is more concerned about satisfying or pleasing their boss rather than taking care of their people.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd.
Yeah.
Very, very odd.
Yeah. What a great example. And I like how you frame that as like, this could have been an opportunity for some curiosity, an opportunity for a different way to work, an opportunity for a different work situation. And instead it turned into a disciplinary action that maybe didn't really need to happen, and a misunderstanding about what that employee needed in the moment, and also continues to need to be able to do their work, and not recognizing, the individual needs of that person. So yeah, thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah, sure.
I know our conversation is going so great. This is so wonderful. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. So I did want to ask you, because you do have so many connections with different people here in Louisville specifically, but also across the state. From your perspective, what do you think are the resources that nonprofits need to be able to combat burnout and to focus on health and wellness? And since I know you do a lot of work in with juveniles and with children, is there anything specific to industry? Do certain nonprofits need some things and other nonprofits need different things to combat burnout?
So I think a lot of this could be solved with the philanthropic community, right? I think, especially in Louisville is very, very odd in the way that the philanthropic community has a real grip on what is happening with our nonprofits and their funding resources and their direct services, and all of that impacts the employee experience. And one of the things that happened during the social justice movement of 2020 was all of these corporations were all pledging, $1 billion here, $2 billion here, $5 billion here, right? But when it came down to applying for these funds from these different organizations, they had not relaxed the rules of the application process. And that application process would likely start with, you have to have 3 years of operating experience in order to apply for these funds. Well, as you're probably aware of, during 2020, you had a lot of brand new nonprofits that were coming out of the needs in the community, right? And the folks that were launching these different entities had a real personal experience with the need, so they knew exactly what was needed and how to deliver it. What did it need to look like? Um, and all the attributes that needed to be contained within it. Um, and then so when they went back to the philanthropic community and started applying for these funds, you were met with all these different rules, such as you have to have uh, delivered services to 100 people. You had to be in operation for 3 years. Just various things that made it very difficult. There were just barriers to being able to apply for the funds. And as the philanthropic community was receiving this feedback, they did begin to relax the rules. You no longer needed to be in operation for 3 years. Now you need to be in operation for 1 year. And so that helped to a degree, right? And we're definitely grateful for any kind of relaxation of the rules. But can we do more, right? How about just remove that requirement completely? And so the problem really is this fiduciary responsibility that people carry. It's a burden for the philanthropic community to ensure that the dollars are spent in a way that satisfies their funders, right? So I'm gonna use the Community Foundation of Louisville. And so CFL, I was a part of a subcommittee for the Community Foundation of Louisville, where they brought myself in and a lot of other folks from around the community doing direct service and things of that nature. And they were really open with us. They said, hey, look, we have a fund of, and I think the number was something like $3 million, right? We have a fund of $3 million. And yeah, we're an entity with a portfolio of $600 million, but we have $3 million available to do something that this community has identified as a real need in the community, right? And when we asked, well, what about the other 97%, of the funds? Well, they were really open with the fact that the other 97% of their funding all has strings attached, right? And so when you have a philanthropic community that has strings attached to all the dollars and how they are doled out or how they are approved for, disbursement or reimbursement or whatever it may be, then that can definitely lead to sort of a stifling of creativity, a stifling of passion, a stifling of production, of really producing the type of work that needs to be carried out in order to feed people, right? Or to clothe people, or to provide a roof for people, or to provide transportation for people, or get people to the interview, And I think that as long as we have these legacy philanthropic organizations who are really at the controls and steering the rest of the philanthropic community in the direction that they're heading with their funding, is going to continue to impact the way that employees can, or not employees, but leaders can affect the well-being of their employees. If the grant proposal says, I'm going to give you, 300 grand, and I'm going to give you, the first 75 grand in the first 6 months, and then you could get the remaining 225 grand over the next, 3 years beyond that. The nonprofit entity doesn't have a lot of wiggle room or lateral sort of power or decision making to improve the quality of the work environment for the employees.
Yeah. Wow. So it's such a really interesting thing that I have not thought about. And I'm so grateful for you for articulating it in that way. it would be maybe the takeaway message is like, hey, donors, donors, if you're listening, I know that some of the fundraising and that I have to do in my job as university professor and in some of my roles at my university is to ask people for money. And it is hard to ask people for money for things like employee development, employee training, paid time off. People don't want to give money for operating expenses, for things like payroll. They want to give money for buildings, things that have their name on them. They want to restrict how the funds are used. And if you do that kind of restriction, you are restricting how those leaders are able to take care of their employees at those nonprofits. They don't have the leeway to be able to take care of them in the ways that make the most sense.
Absolutely. And it's you sort of you wonder whether or not you're going to need a really groundswell of protests to change, but then people have to choose their battles wisely, right? So this is one of those things where protests today may create change in the next 10 years, or are we going to focus on the things that we could do to get people fed today, right?
Right.
Yeah. So as we're coming to the end of our time together, Eric, I was thinking about, typically we ask folks to provide a message to people who are going through burnout and what you might want to share. But I'd like to flip that a little bit on its head and ask you to share a message to leaders who are trying to mitigate burnout in their organizations or provide wellness to their organizations. What would you say to a new leader who may be listening, who's trying to take those first steps to provide a good environment for their employees?
And I think that what I found really inspiring about the podcast with Andrew Huberman and Dr. Aaliyah Crum was this idea of using stress as an enhancer, stress as a positive attribute. And it really starts with mindset. What is a leader's default when it comes to the challenges that they face, either as an organization, as a community, we as a nation? Is it to, tighten up the purse strings, if you will, for lack of a better term? Is it to, stop spending? Is it to lay people off? Is it to close locations? Is it to, really ratchet or retract your servicing region or area where you're now no longer going to continue to feed this neighborhood because it comes at a higher cost than feeding, these other 4 neighborhoods? Or are you going to be able to lean into it and really figure out how to continue to provide the services as a result of what solutions you have been able to develop? You became a stronger organization, providing more direct services. You created an opportunity or mechanism to serve more people, which created more opportunity to receive more grant dollars. And at the same time, you're able to provide a livable wage for your employees, to ensure that no one is working more than 40 hours a week. And also, you're now able to ensure that people can take time off on the weekends and time off on holidays to spend with their families. And it was because you didn't run from the opportunity, you ran towards the opportunity. And I think that is something that should be default, right? It should be a mindset. It should not be, well, I talked to so-and-so and they've really convinced me that, well, what happens next time when so-and-so is not available for that conversation? If you are in a tight rubber band situation, you're not going to be able to continue to expand your scope, your lens, your mindset into the realm of the possibilities. You're too busy in fear of all the vulnerabilities, right? So this is one of the things that I think that Brene Brown broke ground on in 2010, right, when with her TED talk about the strength of vulnerability. And I think that more leaders can absolutely lean into those types of research and put it to work, right? Execute on the findings rather than retracting. Thank you all for your time. I don't want to
I'm
go over as well.
No, I'm so grateful that you brought up Dr. Aaliyah Crumb's research, though,
Mhm.
because I was so happy to listen to that podcast that you sent to us. We will put that information in our description for this episode so that other folks can go and listen to it. But the work that
Mhm.
she's doing on mindsets is really fascinating. So I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention so that I could learn a little bit more about that.
Mhm. Mhm. You're welcome.
Courtney, do you have anything else?
I loved this conversation. This was so great. Eric, every time you and I chat, I feel like you teach me something new every time. I learn something new, whether it's through your advocacy work or just conversations that we've had together. So, yeah, I'm just so appreciative of you and the time that you've given us today. And thank you for sharing your stories.
Thank you, Courtney, for the opportunity. I'm glad you're listening. It's you let me now go and speak in ways into which we can all make a difference together, right? So I think that as we continue this partnership or this collaboration and find other ways in which we can come together and continue to spread these messages of really hope and strength, I think that one day we could put ourselves all out of work.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. The goal of many nonprofits is to not have to do this work anymore, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, Sarah, it is time for our favorite part of the podcast, which is the Ripples of Gratitude. So, for our listeners, the Ripples of Gratitude is part of our nonprofit wellness initiative through the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. And the idea with the Ripples of Gratitude is that organizations can systematically thank and recognize people that they want to give a special shout out to, which will inspire those people to recognize other people, which then ripples through the organization, creating a culture of gratitude. And so to inspire folks to do that, you and I are going to share who we are thankful for and grateful for over the past week. And my ripple of gratitude is going to go out to those people planning conference events. So I took my students this past weekend to an honors conference, and I know how much work it takes to put on a conference. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I myself was new to the role of assistant director of the honors program here at Bellarmine and had to plan a whole conference that semester. And there's just a lot of detail that goes into it. There's a lot of time management that goes into it, but then there's also a lot of creativity. So the conference that we took students to, we had a trivia night that we did, which wonderful if you have a group full of honor students and honors faculty. Trivia is always a great idea. They had really fun eclectic 90s music that was playing in between the trivia questions. And I was like, somebody is really paying attention here. When we went into the dining hall, they had this video that was on YouTube that was playing soft music with almost like a little Thomas Kincaid cabin setting with a fireplace going. That's a level of detail that people are paying attention to when they are planning the conference. And then, of course, just dealing with all of the unexpected things that come up. Students are sick. This session now is shortened. Can we move people around? And I will say that this conference was it was meticulously and what appeared to be effortlessly planned, but I know it took so much effort to go into it. And I know you know how much effort it takes to go into a conference. You have done many conferences in your time through KPA and KPF.
Yes, I sure have. I got about 18 of them in my belt. Yeah, kudos to people who plan conferences because it is not easy. And a lot of times, you've heard the old adage, like a duck swimming on water, they look really graceful on top, but underneath their feet are going crazy. That's what it's like to run a conference. There are always things that come up that throw you for a loop. You can't be prepared for everything that's going to happen on site, no matter how long you plan for a conference or a convention. So absolutely, kudos, big kudos to all of the people who spend their time and energy to plan events like this. It is no easy feat, and we salute you.
Yeah. And when Sarah's talking about unexpected things like, oh, I don't know, Sarah, the power going out at the hotel where you're holding the conference at.
True story that literally happened to us in our 2024 convention. The power went out. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to give people lunch. Like, we were trying to figure out if we could get somebody to cater a lunch for that many people. Like, it was a wild event. So yes, for those of you who are resilient and flexible during conference stress situations, like, you guys are awesome.
And you know who else too at those conferences to shout out is not just the people planning them, but the people who are working them, the catering folks, the folks that are setting up the tech, the folks in facilities who are putting tables up and taking them down. That's a lot of like the behind the scenes work that
Mhm.
it takes a lot of effort and work to put a good conference together. And those are the people that you don't normally get to see. Like, the room's already set up by the time you get there, and
Mhm.
somebody is cooking the food way far away. And I want to shout out those people too, because they usually don't get any recognition for the work that they're doing at a conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent ripple, Courtney.
Yeah. So if you go to a conference in the future, or if you're at an event, like, be sure to thank the people who are around you who are putting that event on or serving you at that event. Yeah. Sarah, what's your
Absolutely.
gratitude?
So my gratitude has a little bit of a backstory. So I'm going to give some context. My son was recently injured at a local gym where he competes on a sports team.
He's
Um,
okay now,
he is
everybody.
okay now. He
He's
is
okay
okay
now.
now. So he dislocated his knee while he was competing at this gym. And it was a really stressful situation for everybody. And at the gym, while my spouse was managing my child being injured, um, the folks at the desk didn't really know what to do. Like, they offered him ice. Like, do you need some ice? And my husband was like, I need you to call an ambulance. And that didn't happen. So one of our friends called an ambulance. And so he's fine. It was a scary event. If you've never been in an emergency room with your child, don't recommend. 0 out of 5 stars, not my favorite. Um, but later, a couple weeks later, that staff person who was sitting behind the desk found my husband at that gym and and apologized profusely for her lack of action, for her not knowing how to react in that situation. They had been trained to ask if they needed ice and things like that. Like, it was very low level training, and you could tell that this person felt a lot of guilt and had carried a lot of that guilt with them um, until they saw my husband and my son back at the gym. And very apologetic, feeling really terrible about what happened. And she told my husband, because my husband said, we understand, like, you weren't trained to deal with this. We're sorry that that was traumatic for you too, and that you were feeling some guilt about that, but he's fine and everything's okay. And that staff person said, well, I talked to my management team, and we're now going to be trained on what to do when there are serious injuries at our gym. And so I want to shout out today two people. I want to shout out the employee who's brave enough to go to their management team and say, "Hey, this situation happened to me. I was not prepared for it, and we need to do something to change it." And I also want to give a ripple of gratitude out to the management teams who are receptive to that information and turn around and do something about it quickly. So, what was a really scary situation for us as a family to manage, um, other families will not experience that the same way that we did, because the management team and that staff person recognized that they were not prepared to deal with that, and they're doing something about it. And I think that we should applaud when organizations see that change needs to be made and they make those changes. So that's who
Yeah.
my kudos go out to this week. My ripples go out to this week.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so good about that is that instead of blaming that staff person for their inability to act quickly and call 911, I don't know if you've ever had to do CPR training before, but this is something that they teach you in CPR training is that we know about things like the bystander effect from social psychology. We know that if people are standing around and witnessing something traumatic happening, a bad injury, people freeze. They don't know what to do. It's fight, flight, freeze,
Mm-hmm.
faint are the responses that our sympathetic nervous system goes into when we see something traumatic happen or something traumatic happens to us. So when you take CPR training, one of the things that they teach you is don't just say somebody call 911 because then nobody calls 911. You
Right.
have to point to a person and you say you call 911. So you put the responsibility on a person. And we have to teach people that in CPR training because that's what happens when people are in a situation like that. They may not know what to do or how to handle it. So kudos to, yes, that brave staff person for feeling safe enough to go to their manager and say something, but also for the management staff to be able to recognize, oh, this is a moment where we could train people. Let's make sure that our employees are better equipped to deal with accidents that inevitably will happen at a gym. These are things that can occur. You want to make sure that the people who work there feel empowered to be able to deal with that. We're not going to turn them all into EMTs. I don't think that that's the role of their job duties should not include that as well. But giving people some sense of empowerment of, I know how to handle this if this were to happen. That's an important lesson that I think a lot of organizational leaders could take that into other parts of their organizations. Like, where else might my employees not know something that I could teach them or train them? And maybe anticipate instead of react to an event happening. Maybe there can be some more preventative measures that can be taken. So maybe that inspires other gyms or other organizations to think about where those gaps may be and help train their folks to deal with emergency crisis or other issues.
Right, because you want your people to feel successful and good about the work that they're doing, and that person did not go home feeling good about the work that they did that day. And so I think the management team being receptive and hearing her say that, and saying that the way that I need, like what I need to be successful in this situation in the future is training on how to manage it. So kudos to them for doing that. It is not an easy thing to go to your boss and say, hey, I need this. I need you to do this, so that I can be good at my job. So kudos to that person. Kudos to the management team who listened and took that seriously and are providing training for their staff.
Yeah. And so glad that your son is doing okay. They bounce back so quickly, these little ones.
Yeah, it couldn't be me. Like I'd be in a full body cast. Like, I'm sorry. I'm a big baby. My bones ain't what they used to be. And so yes, I'm very happy that he is as resilient as he is. I am still like nervous every time I see him bend his knee. I'm like, don't do that.
Sure.
Don't
Don't bend that joint that's supposed to bend. What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Stop that. Yeah, it's been quite a parenting journey, going through physical rehab with a child that you watch sit in an emergency room. Very scary.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
very scary, but so grateful for the people that took care of him and glad that he's doing okay. So,
yes, absolutely. Thanks.
all right. And that's our ripples for this week.
The Burnout Room is sponsored by the Kentucky Psychological Foundation. If you'd like to help support our work bringing free mental health resources to Kentucky nonprofits, please consider donating at KentuckyPsychologicalFoundation.org.
Huge thanks to our producer, Nikki Collerich, for all of her amazing work, and to my father, Mike Russell, for composing our music.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being a part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and feel free to leave a comment about topics that would be most helpful to you and your organization.
We'll see you next time.